Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to As I Live and Grieve. We have a really special guest with us today, and I'm really excited for you to hear our conversation. With us today is Lizz Ortolani, that Stephanie and I both know from working at the Comfort Care Home. And so we've known Lizz for a number of years. Lizz is a practitioner of yoga, and that's our topic for today. We think of self-care, and especially with the holidays approaching, we know how difficult it can be for people, especially if you're on a grief journey. No matter where you are in that journey, there are still stressful times, and you know that we urge self-care. So, without any further delay, let me introduce you to Lizz. Lizz, would you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I've been a board member at the Shepherd Home for, I think, almost 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so comfort care and end-of-life care is really close to my heart. I'm also a licensed social worker, and it was my first job out of college working as a social worker. So when I came to the Shepherd Home many years ago, it felt like kind of like completing the circle and getting back to my roots. And then I'm excited to talk about yoga, which I've also been practicing for about 9 years as well. And actually, now that I say that out loud, they both coincide.
They do.
Coincidentally. Yeah.
They do. Thanks. Well, we're happy that you found the time. We know this is your busy season in your other job. You wear many hats, but we know this is your busy time. But we appreciate that you took some time for us today. When we talk about yoga, many people, of course, have tried it. Many people, of course, continue to do it on a weekly basis or on a regular basis. I myself have tried it only once or twice. And somehow I just, well, you know how it gets. Life gets in the way. And I just haven't done it. I know Stephanie's done it a few times as well. So we know basically what it's about. But maybe, Lizz, you can tell us what some of the general benefits are for yoga. What are the things that a person can hope to achieve by practicing yoga or even going to just one session initially?
Well, there's a lot of misconceptions about what yoga is. A lot of people picture a very thin, able-bodied, bendy person that does yoga, and certainly that exists. But really, the only requirement for yoga is the ability to breathe. And the only posture that the Yoga Sutras talks about is finding your seat. So all you really need to do is be able to find a seat, and that can be any variations of sitting, and breathe. In Western culture, we've adapted the yoga that came from India into a very fitness-oriented practice, but there are actually many styles to choose from. And truly, anybody can do yoga, although not every class is as open to everyone. But basically, it's pairing movement to breath and starting to connect to the senses. And the mindfulness of yoga is what attracted me to it and what keeps me doing it 9 years later. I've tried many types of movement that I've never been one who enjoys the gym or being on a treadmill. And, I stare at the clock the whole time I'm there. Yoga for me is, it's a practice. And so we'll talk about practicing yoga. And it is something that I find when I do regularly, not only helps my body, but really helps my mind.
That's interesting. I remember one of my emotions in my limited experience with yoga. And I was actually in a session that was chair yoga. So they have a variation of it for people that have limited mobility, or somebody who could be recovering maybe from surgery or something, could do something like this. I remember one of my emotions, though, was impatience. I was a bit frustrated at the slowing down. Yet when I look back, I think that's probably really what I needed was to slow down. And with the breathing tied into your movement or sitting motionless even, that can be very difficult to do. So do you have any suggestions for how to kind of overcome that feeling of impatience?
Practice.
Practice.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
going to say, do it more than once.
Do it more than once.
Yeah.
That's really normal. That's very common. And that's actually the practice of yoga is learning to tolerate the frustration that comes from that. And then like for me, throughout the practice, there are moments where all of a sudden I realize, so this is often how I describe it. So like I'm chronically late to everything, like I was today, logging on a minute after we were starting. And so I always like come in a whirl, I'm not necessarily late, but like I get there the moment it starts, even though every yoga studio says, get there 10 minutes early and find your seat and stuff. Yeah, that's not me. I rush in, I plop down, my head is swirling. I'm thinking about the conflict that I might have had at work that day. I'm thinking about the grocery list of things I need to get. I'm thinking about where I need to be. Like I have all these things in my mind, right? And like a snow globe, I'm just like all shaken up. And then I arrive on the mat and the teacher starts talking and they're walking me through all these exercises. And then probably like 15 minutes in, I realize, oh, I was just paying attention to only the thing I was doing. And I have forgotten my grocery list and the work stress and the other thing. And now I've remembered those things again. But like the moments, the gaps in between get longer the more I practice. And another piece of yoga when you're doing any style that has a routine to it is there's muscle memory that kicks in. So like I actually get to that moment quicker now that I've been practicing regularly. Like as soon as my body hits a certain posture, it starts to know, okay, now we're going to start to relax and we're going to start to come into the moment. Like trying anything new though, we come in uncomfortable. We come in distracted. Impatient is totally normal, especially if we're not feeling confident because it's something new. And so just allowing, like everybody starts with their first practice. A lot of people say, well, I can't do yoga. I'm not flexible. Well, you get flexible by doing yoga. And the only way to do that is to get through that initial newness of it. When somebody comes to their first class, I get so excited because you only get one first class.
Right. And I remember, I know the few classes that I took, the teacher started out asking who was new. And that way she kind of knew she did the regular poses, but then someone like me who's not very flexible and my balance is not very good, she would show an alternate way to do it. She said, eventually you'll get here, but this is how you start out. But I was worried doing yoga because I thought I'm never going to be relaxed. I'm not a relaxed person. I'm tense. I will probably laugh at myself. I can't be quiet. It's not going to happen. But I was like, I really want to try it. And I did. And it took me a bit to relax, but I think the background slow music and then hearing the teacher talk in almost that monotone, soft voice, I was just like, okay. And I just I had to try really hard at first to concentrate on that alone. But I just, even doing like a 10-minute session on YouTube, I'm like, wow, that just really, and the breathing, paying attention to your breathing and your feet grounded on the floor, just those little simple things. When I seem to be having like some anxiety or whatever during my day, I try to switch my mind to that, to thinking of that, to try to calm myself down. So just a few practices from only a few classes that I've had, I think are really helpful. And if you haven't tried it yet, you should try it.
I think I might need to go back.
Yeah.
But that brings up a good point, Stephanie. Liz, would you say that some of the techniques, for lack of a better word, that you might learn through a yoga class, that you can kind of take little sections of those during your regular day to help you kind of relax a bit and focus?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the lessons that we learn on the mat become lessons for off the mat. And much of it for me has to do with the breath or the grounding, like Stephanie referred to. So one of the lines that I say in my class a lot is find the ease in the exhale. So like in certain postures, when they're not like sharp pains are bad, so you never want to do anything that hurts, but we're often holding something longer than our mind wants us to. So you breathe through that, right? And so we'll say, find the ease in the exhale. And I can remember one time I had had a stressful situation. I had gotten into like a verbal argument with someone, and I'm driving home and I'm gripping the steering wheel, and I'm just replaying the conversation over in my head a bunch of times. And I realized I'm holding my breath. Exhale. Like, so short breaths, like quick short breaths are when we're anxious or fearful or just it's a stress response. So you start to learn how, okay, slow the breath down, take deeper breaths, make the exhale longer than the inhale. All of that happens off the mat or can happen off the mat. And so I've learned to know where I feel stress, where I feel thing, and they'll be, that pain in my gut or lower your shoulders from your ears.
Yeah.
All of that is what we learn from doing the other postures. And that makes me to be a more pleasant mom and coworker and daughter and friend and all those things. My kid will often say, Mom, have you done yoga lately?
Oh, dear. Oh, my. You've used the term grounding a few times. And although I think I know what you mean, can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure. So actually, let's do it right now. So we're all seated because we're doing a podcast. So in your seat, like find your seat. So if you can, get both feet firmly planted onto the ground and then get your seat kind of firmly in your seat. So sit somewhat upright. And with that, just notice the earth beneath your feet. So if you can, like press into all four corners of the feet. And this is a yoga term, find your sit bones. So if you can kind of rock back and forth and find your center and find a place to put your hands, maybe your lap or your knees.
Okay.
And with that, we say get grounded. So it's connecting to the environment around us, which is often the floor or our seat.
Okay.
And that's getting grounded.
And how does that help you?
So you start to notice what's touching the earth, like what parts of your feet are part of your seat. And how does that help us? It helps us by coming into the moment. So I heard everyone kind of talk about like having a lot going on in our head or being on the go. And so often, although my body is here, my mind is in tomorrow or my mind is in yesterday, especially related to grief. So grounding helps us get into the current moment. Of exactly where we are, the here and now.
And then from that point, you do what? You work on breathing?
Usually. So it's coming into the body and the breath, or being mindful about what the next step, and that could be figurative, what the next step is, rather than going on impulse or reaction, which is what most of us spend much of our day doing.
Right, right. And for many of us, they may be limited to viewing yoga as what they've seen in a movie or on a TV show. And there are some difficult, some awkward positions and everything. But are there a lot of positions in yoga? And do you go through all of them in a class?
So there's a lot of styles of yoga, and there are many variations of a few positions. So there are probably an endless number of variations, but honestly, there's only like a few dozen postures that can have multiple expressions. So in yoga teaching community, there's often a debate over the language that we use with that. So like Stephanie shared, so there might, we use blocks and we use props. So for example, this morning I had an all levels class that I taught, and down dog is probably a position or a posture that a lot of people visualize if you think of yoga journal, right? So it's an inverted V. So at its base, people have their feet like hips distance apart, their hands are on their mat, their butt is in the air. And you picture a very usually thin, able-bodied person with their full foot on the ground, their legs are straight, and it really looks like an inverted V. Well, there's many ways for all of us, depending on body size, type, and ability, to do down dog. So today in class, we had some who looked like that, some who bend their knees, some whose heels will never touch the floor, some who put blocks underneath their hands to bring the floor closer to them, and some who use a chair to get that same shape. So we all got the benefit of the posture, and one has, their hands on the top of a chair and they're not all the way down on the ground. And there's that's just a simple example. People in wheelchairs can do down dog as well. So that's where like one posture can have 8 expressions and they're all right. And one's not better than the other. And some of us will never have full hands and feet on the ground, and that's totally okay.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. I know there were some that I I couldn't do. And having the block, whether it's like a rectangular block, if no one has seen it. And so you can put it, lengthwise or upward if you needed it higher. Because I can't even remember what pose it was. And they were like, use the block. And I was like, oh, that makes it much easier. Because then I felt like I wasn't straining and didn't feel bad, like I wasn't touching the floor. And so, yeah, those can come in handy too.
Okay. All right. The one class I went to didn't have any props like that.
But it was chair yoga. So the chair was the prop.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we also do what we can work with within our environment. So it's wonderful when I'm teaching yoga in a yoga studio that has blocks and straps and blankets and bolsters and all these like wonderful things. And then sometimes we do what we can with what we have. Another thing people often think of is like handstands and all these inversions that many people work toward. And when you're practicing and make that a goal, it can feel great to achieve it, but you don't have to go upside down. I have weak wrists that are prone to injury. And after my last injury, I went to the hand doctor and said, what can I do? I do yoga. And she just looked at me and said, hands are not feet. Like, stop doing that, And so I don't do handstands. It's okay.
Wise advice. That's interesting. One of the mentions that I said early on was the pose Savasana.
Mm-hmm.
As particularly helpful for someone who might be grieving. Can you tell us what that position is and why you think it might be of benefit to someone?
Yep, Shavasana. So again, multiple styles. So just to relate to that, Shavasana is in most of the styles. So I'm trained in Vinyasa, which is a flowing yoga that comes from the lineage of Hatha yoga. There's also Kundalini. There's, oh my goodness, just an endless number. But Shavasana you'll usually find in any type, and it translates to corpse pose as you referenced. It usually comes at the end. And so in the style that I teach, there's like the beginning, like warm up. There's like a peak of activity. There's balances, postures, standing. We make our way onto the ground, and then we end in Shavasana. The way I think of it, and this is not how it has to be, but the Shavasana is the reward, and that every bit of the practice before that was actually preparing my mind for Shavasana. So like if I went right to a rested pose, as I mentioned, how I come in, I am not ready for that. So all of the twisting, the bending, the sweating, the breathing gets my mind ready for that final meditation. At its base, it's often taught that people are lying on their back. But again, it could be seated. It could have props to make it, because not everybody can lie flat on their back on the floor. Right. Or maybe not just Ken doesn't want to. So Shavasana simply means that corpse pose, which is if you picture someone lying on their back, like a dead man's pose. So usually lying on their back, palms can be up or down. It's completely relaxed. So at that point, we let go of the postures. We let go of keeping track of the breath. And when the mind wanders, we train ourselves to just acknowledge, oh, there's my dog asking for water downstairs, knocking its bowl. Okay. And then I bring it back. Oh, I just heard a car go by, and then I bring it back. Oh, somebody knocked over their water bottle. I bring it back. It's the quiet part of the practice. Sometimes there's music, and that's usually where it ends. And it, like everything before that was purposeful. The gentleness breaks in yoga are by design. They're purposeful.
Interesting.
Liz, I did a search on Google about yoga during grief. And I guess there's something actually called grief yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that it uses yoga, movement, breath, and sound to release pain and suffering and to reconnect back to love. Yeah. I didn't know that there was a specific yoga to grief.
I think that anybody who seeks yoga specific to their need, they'll find it.
Yeah.
The history of yoga. So yoga is like 3,000 years old, right? And it's often, it's got its roots in India, and it often has overtones of religious history too. So whether there's Buddhist or Hindu influences and styles in the West, it's been adapted into it's been secularized or fitnessized, where the spiritual practice has been taken out. And I'm going to get to the point about grief. And it has also more recently been studied as from a scientific or from like the medical community for the benefits that it has for treating trauma and grief. That's been there the whole time. I mean, it's kind of like returning to the ancient wisdom of yoga. And then we're using our Western medicine to validate what many have known for a long time. So that said, I'm trained. I'm also a licensed social worker. And then I've also taken training in trauma-informed yoga. And really, it's that mindfulness of like tapping into the grief and giving it a place to stay and a place to release. So like when we hold on to grief, we literally hold it in our muscle. We hold it in our nerves. We hold it in certain areas of our body. And grief allows us to tap in to actually feel it, because many of us run from grief, or we're carrying it with us. We either run from it or we hold on to it and don't have a place for it to go in a healthy way. And so yoga can help us to have the somatic place to release the grief or give it a space. And it's very common to cry. Actually, first time I did yoga was in a period of time where I was not very healthy. It was before 9 years ago when I started, and I got like a gift certificate to go. And about 3/4 of the way through the practice, I just started crying. And it wasn't from like physical pain, like make that clear. Like nobody had put me into a posture that hurt. But that release, I wasn't prepared for. It scared the heck out of me. I said, I'm not going back. Who goes to yoga to cry, you know? And then a couple years later, a friend of mine had become a teacher and wanted to practice teaching. And she invited me to this, like, basically just this impromptu class for friends and friends of friends so she could practice teaching. And I told her that story and she said, oh, don't worry about it. It happens. It happens all the time. And not all the time as in you'll cry every time, but it happens more frequently than you know. And don't worry about it. Nobody's looking at you. They're too concerned about themselves. And she was absolutely right. So to have an emotional release, believe it or not, from the postures is it's giving space for those feelings to come out. Mm-hmm. And it can be very cathartic and therapeutic. I've had some really good cries from yoga that are not expected, you know, because I'm thinking about my grocery list when I came in and I go, where did that come from?
Yeah, I would probably be the one that would be most apt to cry. I think if I ever stopped long enough to release some of the stuff that's probably stuck in my body somewhere.
So a trained teacher, and, you know, there's all ways to do it, gives you space to do that. So like, the way I think of it is like, I actually don't cry unless the space is safe. So is the physical environment safe to my physical well-being? Mm-hmm. Is the environment safe with the other people in the room? So it's not just the teacher, but the other students. Right. And so when it's safe, that's when I cry. If I go in on guard, there's no way that's going to happen. So it's actually like, rather than thinking like, oh goodness, I cried in yoga today, it can be, oh, that means that I finally could, you know?
Yeah, right. Good point. Stephanie, you mentioned an experience you had, and I think your first yoga class, maybe it wasn't your first.
It was my first.
With that very position, Shavasana.
Yes. I walked into my first class, felt very awkward and nervous, and went to the back of the room, started, looking around, seeing what everybody was doing. I was like, okay, so I roll out my mat and I'm sitting there, and then almost kind of last minute in walks this woman who, she looks like she's in a hurried mess, and she comes and she unrolls her mat, sits down, takes off her sweatshirt and sits there and looks at me and she goes, I come here for the last 20 minutes of the class. And I was like, okay. Like, I had no idea what she was talking about. She goes, we just lay down on our backs and we be quiet. She goes, it's like a nap for me. I have a couple toddlers at home. And she goes, this is what I come for. And I was like, I'm never going to be able to relax and do this. This is not going to be for me. And we got to the end and we're laying there and she's talking through, like, relaxing, pretty much going through every part of your body, relaxing and feeling the ground underneath you and all that stuff. And I was trying really hard to pay attention to do it. And then afterwards I was like, wow, I really did it. I really relaxed. And it was very calming and I loved it. I was like, okay, I get why you come for that part. That was great.
Yeah. The yoga nap. That's
right.
I've heard it referred that way. That's great. And kind of related to yoga for grief. So like we can all pull up a video, and there are great YouTube videos and online versions. It's a great way to learn by yourself at home. But part of what I get from yoga in person is community. So when you go to a yoga class, in particular, if it is targeted for people dealing with grief, that means everyone in the room is also on their journey of grief. And then you find connection and fellowship and community. And that adds a whole nother level to the yoga. Right. When you start practicing with others and then they start to see you change and they'll be like, you did that posture. You've been trying to do that for weeks and you just did it,
Mm-hmm.
or they're seeing it or you're trying to do something you haven't done before and you get that encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where, so like I also teach yoga for people in recovery. And I think, having that common journey in there just adds to it rather than an open class. And open classes are great too. And, but that's the difference to me for doing yoga in community versus just at home. You wouldn't get that woman saying, I come for the 20 minutes of quiet.
Yeah.
Right. It's the only time I quiet my
I
mind.
think because of her saying that to me, I think I was like, okay, I get this. And it made me kind of appreciate the pose more because I was like, okay, this is important. Definitely.
Because the other thing could be, why are we just lying here? I could just do this at home.
Right.
Well, it's purposeful. That lying there for 20 minutes is purposeful.
Is it really 20 minutes?
Well, it could be different. It usually, isn't it like 10 to 15 to 30? It all depends on the class.
It depends on the class, more or less. It's typically 10% of the class time.
Oh, okay.
So if it's a 60-minute class, you're going to have 6 minutes of Shavasana. I mean, that's the guide. It'll be more, it'll be less.
Right.
I just want to let everybody know too that it's not only grief, but any of the stress that we have in our lives, which we all have it, especially now after this pandemic, we headaches, we get pains in our joints and our muscles, everything like that. Don't feel like yoga is still an exercise. Yoga, just because you might not be running on the treadmill and doing cardio, it's still going to release those good endorphins for you and make you feel better. So I don't want anybody to feel like it's not really a workout, because it is. And if anything, it's probably better for your mindfulness and for your head, because it helps clear that up more. I never had an experience like that on the treadmill. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, there's active yoga, there's gentle yoga, like yin yoga has postures that are held longer that help stretch out. So like athletes who have tight muscles will gravitate toward yin. There's restorative yoga, which is like you prop yourself with like a million pillows into the easiest positions to hold and you just stay there. And that's a practice for the mind in another way. So there's all kinds of styles. The more physical, ultimately you get stronger too. And
that's interesting.
Yes, but it's not all working out is cardio. You know?
Yep.
Is there a website out there that you would recommend as a credible resource for people that wanted to know more about yoga or the different styles if they were looking for something specific?
Yoga International is a good organization that has a lot of good videos, connections to teachers. The Yoga Alliance is one of the professional organizations that some yoga teachers will maintain a certification in. You don't really need a certification to teach yoga, like need as in legally. It's usually a teacher teaching a student who then, passes that on to the next student. Those are the two probably larger organizations. It's not regulated. So kind of my story for teaching is I never wanted to teach. I got experience just from practicing. I was going to a class that was a community practice and donation based rather than at a studio. And the teacher had somebody would be new and they'd show up in jeans and a baggy t-shirt and they'd be doing something on their mat. And I'd be next to them. And I'd say, move your foot to the right a little bit to help with that or something. So she saw me giving just little suggestions like that. And so why don't you become a teacher? And I was like, well, I don't want to teach. And I have a job that I'm happy with and etc. And she wanted to hand the class off to somebody and kind of tap me on the shoulder for it. And that's what made me do teacher training because I didn't want to hurt somebody. All of that circles back to you want someone experienced who's not going to hurt you. So just because one body can do something doesn't mean the other can. And so you just have to, when looking at yoga sources, look to the experience and credibility of the teacher, ask where they trained, how they're trained. And then the general guideline is if it hurts, don't do it. Like sharp pains are bad. And I've seen good meaning yoga teachers twist people into positions that are not good.
Yeah.
And that's just important. But there's a wealth of resources out there.
Okay.
But, it's certainly ask people where they've done their training, read where they have, and a message of go, 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 or more is better, I would resist.
Good advice. Good advice. Well, our time is running out. I hate it when that happens, but it just always does every time we do an episode. So before we wrap up, Liz, I want to offer you a few minutes. If there's anything you'd like to say to our listeners, whether you want to promote your studio or where you usually teach, it's all up to you without us directing you with questions. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I did my training in Rochester at Yoga for a Good Hood, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to bringing yoga to communities who normally are not able to access it, either because of financial means or because of racial barriers. So Yoga for a Good Hood is near and dear to my heart. Lots of donation-based classes throughout the Rochester community. I also, in partnership with Yoga for a Good Hood, teach at True, a class for people in recovery called Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. So True Yoga and Yoga for a Good Hood really offer a sense of that community to me, where it's not just that you're going to get a good teacher and a good yoga experience, but the person who came next to you is probably going to greet you, which to me is just so important. And I think my general advice is it's totally normal to feel uncomfortable at the first class. So if you're going to try something, try it 5 times before you decide if you like it or not. You're not going to like it the first time, probably. And if you go to one place that's not welcoming, that might not be the place to do yoga, but try someplace else.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Well, listeners, it's that time where we have to say goodbye till next week. I want to again thank Liz so much for taking time out of her busy day to talk to us about yoga. Hopefully you have a better understanding of how yoga might help counteract or improve some of the physical symptoms we suffer when we grieve, as well as some of the emotional symptoms. And you can do it in a kind of at your own level of comfort, that if the pose or posture that is done by the teacher in the class or by those around you isn't something you can quite accomplish, that it can be modified, it can be altered to your level of comfort. And then as you continue in yoga, you can gradually have a goal of getting to that initial one that you saw. I think I'm really going to have to go back again. So in the interest of self-care, consider yoga. I can't think of any, well, I'm going to lock myself into a corner now, but I can't think of any reason why you wouldn't want to practice yoga. And by that, I mean, find a place you like, find a teacher you like, find a community you like, and go regularly. And with the holidays coming up, if you have a friend, maybe you want to grab them one day and say, I've been wanting to go to yoga. I hope you'll go with me. And that undoubtedly will help them as well. Or maybe buy them a gift certificate to a class. But go together, because it's easier to do things as a buddy system. So until the next episode, and we hope you will rejoin us again, we want to thank everyone. Stay safe. Take care of yourself. Remember self-care in the whole realm of your grief journey. Thanks for listening. And we'll catch you again next time as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.